Now we're going to hear from Nokia about the OZO camera. Our presenter is Stuart English. He's an old friend of mine. Stuart was at Panasonic for many years. He moved to Red, where he was instrumental in the development of the Red camera. Now he's at Nokia and involved in another revolutionary capture system. It's called the OZO, and Stuart's going to tell you more about it, and he's got assistance from Miles Eckendorn, I believe. Yes. So, Stuart English.
Thanks very much, Jim. So I'm going to take a chair. Thanks everybody for coming. First of all, I want to thank Richard for the first presentation. That was great. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about OZO. We could do a traditional thing, like a lot of camera manufacturers do, and give you a slide presentation, you know, features, specs. Don't intend to do that, because frankly I think we've all sat through way too many of those. Instead, we've got a couple of cameras here. We've got one which actually we'll be showing you live. We've got one at the back, so after we break, we'll give everybody a chance of hands-on and discussion. As Jim said, I've sort of been around cameras for about 20 years, and I've had the pleasure of working for Panasonic. And when I joined them, I think anybody would reasonably say at the time that if anybody suggested you'd shoot a Panasonic on a production, you'd need your head examined. And Sony ruled the roost. The manufacturer that made that rather silly comment about lighting, I won't say who that was, but it wasn't Panasonic. And we really turned the corner when we brought out the VariCam. And the VariCam had some interesting attributes, one of which was great color. Not great resolution, but great color, variable frame rate, and almost the most important thing was that you could cut it on a desktop computer. So I've had this background belief that corporate industrial applications for video is really where the big market opportunity is, and cinematic storytelling, as much as it's a high profile, big PR thing, is relatively small marketplace, and as storytellers, there's a massive concentration of them here in Los Angeles, but there's lots of different things that we can do with it, and I think that's going to be proving to be true with this new camera. I later had the great honor to be working with Red as one of the founders there, and although we very much targeted the movie industry, again, a lot of the applications turned out to be elsewhere. So now I've got the pleasure of being sort of a new launch again, this time in virtual reality. And one of the things I've been looking at, as I'm in sales job now, so my fundamental responsibility is sell lots of cameras. And to do that, you kind of need to know what exactly is the benefit of the product. So again, we can put up a big slideshow and I'll talk to you about sensors and audio and stuff like that. But the thing we're trying to drive down to is, what do you use it for? Why is it different? And what makes it unique? And I think you can come at that problem from two directions. One is the camera itself, but more broadly, it's about workflow. And as professionals in a creative industry, I think we all understand the importance of efficiency on set and certainty, knowing what will work and what doesn't work, so that we can plan around those things. Because at the end of the day, we're in a reputations-based industry. If we can get the job done on time, on budget, good. We have a job next week. If we screw things up, and things go bad real quick. And in my humble opinion, that's really been, VR has been a bit of a cottage industry and a bit of an experiment. And we desperately need to bring it up to a professional level where, if you will, if cinema can have ARRIs and Reds, and if news can have XD cams and P2 cameras, why can't VR have a professional camera system too? And that's very much what OZO is, as we'll get into. So on the one hand, there's the professionalism of the camera and the workflow and doing the things that you expect it to do. And on the other side, it is, what is VR at all? Why does it work? How do we tell stories? And actually, I'd like to start the discussion from that point of view, because it's been a very interesting experience for myself. So you've had a lot of people talk about VR doesn't yet have enough resolution, and that's one of the things that needs to evolve. And you'll hear a lot of people talking about we may be 10 years away before we actually believe, somebody can actually believe they're really in that location. I'm going to humbly differ in that approach, in that opinion. I'll explain why in a minute. And also coming at this originally from, I came from what I would say was a perfect pixels company. You know, when I was at Red, our whole mantra was make the picture the best as it could possibly be. You know, 2K is not enough. We've got to have 4K. If 4K is enough, 6K is the next step. So we would often sit looking at a 40-foot screen, 8 o'clock at night, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes, looking at a 40-foot screen at the old Desilu studios, looking at the latest imagery and going, wow, that is just wow. But you know, there's a problem. I'm looking at this 40-foot screen, and I can be lost in a story, and I don't care how good the film is, I can be totally engrossed in the story, but I know it's not real. Why? Because there's this great big black frame right around the screen that yells at me, it's not real. So what we also got to bear in mind in all our emotional experiences is we don't see the world with our eyes. We see the world with our brain. We don't hear the world with our ears. We hear the world with our brain. You know, I mean, as Einstein said, reality is the biggest illusion, it just lasts for a long time. You know, something like that. But you know, all these guys have talked about, we have this emotion engine in our head called a brain, and our eyes are just inputs to that, and our ears are just inputs to that. So there's a large part of this, what I'm going to contend to you, it's about how do we respect the model that the brain has, that it uses every day to construct reality. And I'm going to contend to you, that's got nothing to do with resolution. It's got to do with accuracy. And an example of that is it any more real when you wake up and you see a photorealistic rendering of the bedroom that you're in than if you wake up and you haven't yet put your contact lenses in? You know, there's an accuracy piece of it. The accuracy piece of it is the furniture's in the right place, you know, the girlfriend or the wife is there, things are where they're supposed to be, but it doesn't actually matter that my eyesight's shot now and I've got to put my glasses on to bring it into full focus. It is still real, right? And it's consistent and it's accurate, but it's not precise, right? And that's the difference between resolution and accuracy. And you can see the same thing about sound. I don't really care about whether the sound has fantastic dynamic range. The brain doesn't. Artistically we do, but the brain doesn't. What the brain really does care about, though, is that when I turn my head, I have a Doppler-like effect. Now, if I don't get that Doppler-like effect, the brain is really good at understanding when something's not right. Right? Biologically, to understand that tiger is about to jump out and might eat you, we are primed to see edges and movement and sounds, right? These things, and if these things are not right, then what happens is the brain goes into this mode of, you know what, that's not right. What exactly is wrong with that? What's going on? And what you want the brain to do is you want the brain to be an emotions engine, not a querying what's wrong engine, if you will. So my pitch to you will be, as we get into VR, the thing that's most important to giving the impression of immersion is, are my inputs to my visual inputs, my sound inputs, and the other inputs that we can't yet control, things like we have motion sensors in our heads, are all these inputs coming into the brain in a way that's consistent with what the brain knows is the rules that represent reality, right? So is it nice to have more resolution? Absolutely yes. Is it nice to have more precision in audio? Absolutely yes. But I'm going to argue to you that the necessary condition is accuracy between those two and consistency between those two, much more so than any individual precision. And I think that's important because What that tells me is that I can already represent an immersive experience, even using a cell phone, right? And if I can do that even using a cell phone, then gentlemen and ladies, I will tell you there's one very important thing that conveys. There's an audience. And for any media entity, we have to have audiences. So back in 3D, when we did 3D, even if we got the technology right, we made it perfect, there was a fundamental problem. We had to ask someone's permission to distribute the content. And the only way to do that was effectively through, 300 screens across the country, maybe it was 50 screens. But it was a very small audience, so always having a problem engaging on the monetization side of it. 3D television was even worse. I mean, how are you going to get anybody to allow you to transmit the data? VR's not like that. VR has got this wonderful permission built in. If we're distributing to cell phones particularly, all we have to do is download the content over the internet. So already there are no barriers to content distribution. It's not a lot more data rate than any other streaming thing, right? So YouTubes and Facebooks and things like that. So we can quite literally look at audiences of tens of millions, hundreds of millions, actually billions. So when we look at the opportunity from a business perspective, I would contend to you that what we're really looking at is how to generate content that we can connect to an audience. And if you need a big audience, we can reach it. If you got a fragmented audience, we can reach those guys too. So, for this little segment, what I'm going to contend to you is that the reason that VR works is when I put this headset on and I start looking around, there are no boundaries. It's right. You know, if you just do this yourself right now, just look up to the ceiling and look down to the ground, and then look all the way as far as you can to the left and all as you can as far to the right. Everything's in focus. Everything's in stereoscopic. It's not monoscopic, it's all stereoscopic. And as you turn your head, you're actually getting a Doppler effect. You may not notice it, but the Doppler effect is, you know how a pitch when it goes meow. You're having that very same thing. The way your ears are shaped, it's actually called a binaural pickup. Because of the shape of your ears, the phasing and amplitude of the sound as you change your head relative to a sound source changes. And you know that, everybody. You don't know that you know that. It's not a conscious knowing, it's a subconscious knowing. But if it ain't right, the brain is immediately into the, hang on a minute, something's wrong here. So as we look at other VR systems, I would contend to you some of the check that you have to make on whether it feels real or not real is, does it fit the rules of the brain? And the rules of the brain are very simple. Stereoscopic, not monoscopic, and proper stereoscopic, not gigantic, not minuscule, but the appropriate amount of stereo. And stereo at least through this range, which is like you can turn your head all the way like this, and at some point, my peripheral vision is sort of back here right now, but at some point, if I continue to try and turn, this eye sees the nose. But guess what? Unless you actually try and see the nose, you don't see the nose, your brain throws it away. So behind me, I'm seeing monoscopically, right? And then from here, I'm seeing stereoscopic all the way through here, and then back here, and then behind me again, I'm seeing monoscopically. So, excuse me, I know at trade shows people do this. I know at trade shows we sit on spinning chairs and do this. The reality is audiences don't do that. Audiences sit down. So if you're going to try and force me to always look behind me like this, I don't really like you very much as a viewer. No, do it for effect. But the reality is, if we have stereoscopic, basically from here, all the way through here, and like this, this mimics the human experience almost perfectly. And that is what the OZO does. And if we can mimic the sound profile as I turn my head, the phasing changes, then we're mimicking this human experience perfectly. And OZO does. So, if you want to know about OZO, I could tell you about global shutters and pickup and stuff. Yeah. I mean, you know all that stuff. The real takeaway is OZO is a person. It looks like a head. That's because it is a head. Your viewer is actually inside the head. So when we look at the world, we're actually looking at the world as people do. And if you want to know how to direct a story, then I would contend at least one method of telling a story with OZO is to treat the camera as if it were a person. And actually, almost the very best thing is to treat it like it's your very best friend and have a conversation with it. So it's quite different, I think, than a traditional cinema methodology where effectively the action's over there somewhere and we're here and we're kind of looking from the outside in and we're kind of trying to choose and focus the audience's attention on where they should look next. With OZO, I would contend the most compelling method of telling a story is to shoot from the inside out. Put the camera in the middle of the action. Let the camera experience communication. And this rather ties into the name of our group. We're not the virtual reality group. We're called the presence capture group. And the technology is referred to as telepresence, which is the ability to take you from where you are right now and put you in a totally different location, in a virtual location, and have you believe that you're really there. And so I think the value that this particular kind of camera can bring that's very unique is I want to take you to a place that you can't otherwise go. Now I know you can go to a cinema, yes. I know that you can go to a front row seat of a concert, yes. If you've got money, that is, yes. I know you can travel, yes. But there's a lot of people can't do those things. Or there are places that you absolutely can't go. I mean, for example, you can't go on the International Space Station. And actually only about 200 people get to go to the Sistine Chapel every day because the very CO2 that we emit breaks down all the tapestries. And you might not be able to afford to go to a front row seat of a sporting event. And as someone I spoke to quite recently, very well known, can't tell who it was, but he's very well known, we said, we're actually thinking about maybe we could put a camera on the front row seat at one of your concerts. And he looked at me and said, that's a great idea, except this, anybody with money can do that. So how about we do something that nobody can do, which is I'm going to put them fifth seat in the orchestra. I mean, in the violin section, let me put the camera as a person, even to the extent of camera, body, mannequin, cut the head off, put the camera on the body, dress it, so when I look down, I see a body. Put it in the orchestra, because now nobody gets to sit there. The only people who've had the privilege of sitting there have been my kids, because that's how I used to keep an eye on them. So, now that I think is just a good example of there are stories that we can tell and give perspectives that you can't get any other way. And the other thing I would say is there's a trust factor here, which is actually very, very interesting and very exciting to me. When I first put on the headsets, coming from a Perfect Pixel company, put on the headset, first reaction was, okay, there's work to do. All right? I mean, every time I give a headset to an engineer, as engineers, we always look at it and look, we are mentally programmed to look for problems, because our job is to solve problems. If there were no problems, we wouldn't have jobs. So we're always looking for what the problem is to solve next. It's a very different experience, though, when I give it to a member of the general public. Their reaction invariably is, wow, oh my God. And I've been experimenting asking people about what their experience is, and I will confess I'm leading people, right? I mean, I've done this a little while, so I know how to ask questions to get people to go where you want them to answer the question. But even having said that, the sequence of questions goes something like this. Did you enjoy that experience? Yeah, I did. It was great. Some people have said that they sort of got immersed in the story. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I did. I felt I was like, it felt I was right there. Okay. Do you think it was an emotion? Did you have an emotional connection to anything? Yeah, I did. Now, at this point in time, right, we're starting to diverge. I would say that everybody answers those first two questions the same way. Now we start to see diversion. What I'm driving at eventually is this question. Did you trust it? Did you trust it? I would say about half the people I ask say yes. Already, on a cell phone. If you've got people trust the message, that's an incredibly powerful medium, and maybe a dangerous one too, but who doesn't want people to trust the medium? I mean, if you tend to an advertiser, look, you know, you can either put your advert on TV and have people watch it and ignore it, go make a cup of tea, or you can have people actually be engaged in it and actually come away from it kind of like, yeah, I really was emotionally invested in that and I trusted it. That's a huge step forward in terms of storytelling, whatever that storytelling is, whoever you're telling stories for. And I would offer this to you, and this is just purely my philosophy. I think people trust it for a reason, and that reason goes back to the thing I said about consistency of data to the brain. When the brain sees data that it says, that's right, that's correct, that's what I would expect to see, I don't think it has much option but to say, that's right, that's real. Right? I don't think you have much option but to be engaged, but to have emotional, because that is our experience. If you got a good story and you were getting good quality data and it was consistent, why wouldn't you be engaged? Why wouldn't you trust it? Because what is it about it that's telling you, no, that's not right, step away? Well, little things. The weight of the headsets on your head, the fact that it's clamping, it's hot on your ears, the fact that they didn't carefully consider the fact that we have accelerometers on our heads. So if you give me a ride on if you put a camera on one of those roller coasters and it's going and the G-force is going, visually I'm getting the picture that I'm doing this, but I'm not. My ears are telling me I'm not. Or I look down and I see a void and I should see a body. Right, so, but for me, these are storytelling defects and lessons that we will learn as storytellers about the very best way to exploit the technology. It doesn't, for me, take away from the very fundamental that when we give the brain data the way the brain wants to see the data, the brain doesn't have an awful lot of choice but to say, you know what, that's right. That's a really powerful thing. So the camera. Camera itself, as you look at it, it's a ball. I could argue it's a head, but it's really two concentric balls, right? It's made out of a aluminium alloy. It's actually quite lightweight given what's in there, but it's also pretty rock solid. I think we've broken one. Yeah, well, we've lent someone to somebody, you know, there's always some idiot. We gave it to somebody and they thought, that'd be a good idea, we could put it on a car and race it around a racetrack at 100 miles an hour. And first of all, there's a positive thing in here, which I'll come back to in a minute. But look, it's 9 pounds and you're racing it around a racetrack and you're going the same direction all the time. What happens on a single thread? Eventually, so we lost one. It bounced off the tarmac at about 100 miles an hour. Yeah. Good news is that we were able to get to the camera and get the footage off it. We'll show you the footage actually from the very camera that crashed. The other good thing is it puts the lie to an assertion that you can't move a VR camera. You're right. Most VR cameras you can't. That's because they're built wrong. This one you can. There's nothing. You can fly this one any speed you like. The only caveat I would say is we have accelerometers in here. Now, we don't have velocitometers in here. We're not measuring velocity, we're measuring acceleration. So from a human giddiness, sickness point of view, yeah, fly it, no problem. Just be careful about rapid acceleration, deceleration, because that can get some people queasy, right? So just be careful on that. But we'll show you the footage. So this camera, we've had it on cars, we've had it on drones, we've had it on steady cams, we've had it on a whole bunch. All the things that you would expect to put a cinema camera on, we've done it. We've done it. Why does it work that way? Well, because it's built as a ball, it's an inner ball and an outer ball, there's a couple of major factors in its construction that make VR work well. One is this. Remember I said that the eye and the brain, well, not the eye, the brain is really good at seeing edges, right? We've known that for a long time. It's partly why we had more rods than cones, more black and white than color. Color just is a smudge that fills in. But if you were looking at two images, the eye would be extremely sensitive to difference in noise. So it's like shooting two photographs at different sensitivities, right? They have a different grain structure. Well, sensors have a different grain structure too, but fundamentally it's induced by thermals. So we have 8 sensors on this camera, and they're all embedded in an inner core of metal. What that does, first of all, it says that all the sensors are actually contributing heat to a common heat sink, and they're receiving heat back. So that basically all sensors are running at the same thermal temperature. Fundamentally what that means is all the cameras are generating the same noise profile. So if I've got a sensor that's like over here and a sensor that's like over here, as I track across it, the noise profiles are the same. So I don't see this major discontinuity jumping out at me to the brain and going like, hang on a minute, something just changed. What's wrong? Instead, it's very consistent. So that's, in some ways, a minor thing, but it's a major thing in that sense that if anything overheats, it all overheats together. Right? So this is back to certainty. Right? What you don't want in a camera rig is like, oh, that 1 out of 8 cameras is overheating. Oh, great. Now what? Well, bring another camera, swap it out, do something. So everything works together. Everything is in the same thermal block. The big thing, though, is that we know what the geometry is. So when we embed it in metal, that means all the sensors are geometrically locked in position. They cannot move. So unlike a rig camera, where if you put it down, drop it, get it hot, get it cold, the geometry is fundamentally changing through thermal expansion and shock. We know exactly where all the pixels are in our sensor array. So the important thing here is in post, when we reproject the camera data as a point cloud, when we represent that object over there, the left eye, right eye pixels actually line up, and we don't have edge disparity or convergence errors. So when we get into post, the process of post is extremely simplified because we don't have to first work out what the geometry of the camera is and whether it's shifted from the ideal. It can't shift, it's all locked into a metal ball. And on this point, the other aspect is the geometry. We talked about Euclidean and blah, 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 and what Pythagorean, whatever. Rectangles versus spheres, if you will. So here's the reality. When I'm in a headset and I'm turning like this, what I'm describing geometrically is a circle or an arc. I'm not describing a hexagon. So if I have a camera rig with multiple cameras on it, and the cameras are fundamentally shooting rectangles, and I put a whole bunch of those on a rig, what I'm really shooting is a facet, a facet, a facet, a facet. And the real problem comes is where those edges join up, and particularly now parallax of objects close, medium, far away becomes a real problem. And especially if I start moving. And I think that's where the comment, you can't move a VR camera, came from, is that it makes the post-production absolutely nasty. Well, OZO isn't like that. OZO, each of the lenses is shooting hemispherical lenses, and it's arranged, the lenses are arranged around a sphere, and they're shooting hemispherically. So what we're doing is each lens is shooting a portion of an arc, and the next one across overlaps and shoots another portion of an arc. So Richard mentioned that we have a capability on set. We have the capability on set to show you something that's not technically stitched together, but just natively, this is what the camera sees. And we can give you on set immediately a view as to what's going on. So you've got 8 sensors. Can you bring up that flash? Can you bring up the one that has that movie, little clip of the MP4 with all the flashing lights? If anybody shot, how many shot, I mean, I'm not picking on red because this is not a red issue, but how many people have shot reds? All right. Flash photography, right? Anybody flashing? You're familiar with the problem of the split frame? Yeah. Play that. So this is just a little clip example. There is no problem with split frame on this camera. And the reason there isn't is we don't use rolling shutter sensors. So rolling shutter sensors are pretty much standard right across the board of everything. They're in cinema cameras, all of them. But with that, when you get this kind of like flashing lights problem, the reality is when you're rolling the shutter down through the frame, if the light goes off, so this is the 10 rows I'm revealing at the same time. If the light goes off halfway down the frame, it's going to get captured by this block here, and it might be captured in the bottom half of the frame, but the top half of the frame is already being captured, so it's not there anymore. So you see this like, oh, hang on a minute, the flash photography is only in the top, not the bottom. So this little demo clip here just illustrates that. That doesn't happen on this camera. So the sensors themselves are global, which means that every pixel in the sensor is captured at exactly the same moment in time. And all the sensors, all 8 sensors, are also on a common synchronization pulse. So basically, every pixel that the camera captures is captured at exactly the same time. Whereas if you with rig-based cameras, one of your fundamental constraints typically is that, first of all, each individual sensor is a rolling shutter sensor and can be suffering from that split frame problem. And then often there's no way to synchronize the cameras together, so they're all kind of shooting at different moments in time. So when you have this kind of problem of flash frame, or you have motion across the camera, you finish up with split frames and you bend the images because the top and the bottom of the camera picture is being captured at different points in time. So on this camera that doesn't happen. Period. Is there a penalty for that? To be fair, there is, but it's a manageable one, and this is where I come down to certainty. What's important for us as an audience is that we know, and therefore we can plan. So our dynamic range is about 10 stops on this camera, which is perfectly usable, but it's not 15, right? So don't go putting this camera into an environment that needs very high dynamic range. I mean, like, if you're going to go shoot something at twilight, that's probably not the best idea. If you can light the camera creatively within that constraint, it's going to make beautiful pictures. If you try and shoot stuff at midnight with street lights, it's like, it's going to be, well, it's going to get what it's going to get. So that's, 10 stops is a decent number. But the advantages of global shutter, in our opinion, are really fundamental for this issue. Because again, what we're doing is, so much of VR is tracking between camera shots. We've got to have consistency across all the cameras. That's a fundamental of operation. The camera itself, you notice, has got a little tail at the back. It looks like a little tadpole, and it's got a little tail. What's on the back is this. And what this is, it's a battery. So that's about an hour's worth of battery storage. This is about 45 minutes of continuous recording. So it's a 500 gigabyte flash media. It has a USB 3 connector on it. So I can pop that in, I can record to the camera for 45 minutes. And obviously you don't always doing continuous records. But I can record it for 45 minutes, and as soon as I finish recording, I could pop that out and connect that to my laptop with a USB 3, and I could review what I shot. Or the other thing that we're doing, and so let me not go away too far. So as a completely standalone, this goes in the bag, and then I could put this on a Steadicam or whatever drone, and I could be completely self-contained for 45 minutes. And I can talk to it from my laptop because it's got its own built-in Wi-Fi. So I can command it remotely and just say no, enable record, whatever. So if you want to be mobile, that's great. But there's a lot of times where you don't need to be. And when you don't need to be, there's another way of working. And that is give the camera 12 volts, and I do mean 12 volts, not 24, 12 volts. And you see there's a little cable dangling out the back of the camera? That's just that's a single BNC. So the camera has a major challenge in terms of how does it interface to the outside world other than just its own internal recording. And that is we've got 8 2K by 2K sensors. So 2K by 2K is bigger than 1920 by 1080, which is high def, right? So we've got 8 more than high def sensors in a single body. How do we get the data from point A to point B? So the answer is you compress it. So we actually choose to compress it, and the data rate after compression is about 1.5 gigabits per second. If anybody knows their HDSDI specs, 1.5 gigabits a second is 10-bit, uncompressed, 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames a second video. That's what it is. So what that cable is pulling out of the camera is a signal that we are pretending is 1080p video, uncompressed, but it isn't. It's actually compressed data, and we repackage it. We just take the bits that represent the data compressed, and we put it in a container that's equivalent to what a 1080p video signal would be. And because we do that, we can then leverage existing cables and routing switches and fiber optic connections, and we just basically say, look, it's uncompressed 10-bit video. Don't try and compress it, don't touch it. And if you can do that, then we can use existing off-the-shelf stuff, like in here. This is a little Blackmagic, about a $1,500 recorder. It's a Blackmagic SSD recorder. We're just running this cable, goes in the back of that. This is the data it's receiving. It looks like snow. This is the, quote, video that it's receiving. It thinks, hey, it's valid video. It just happens to look like snow because it's compressed data. Each one of these can record for about 90 minutes. So if we want to do a 3-hour recording, then we just basically construct ourselves, I call this the VR DIT station, right? What is it? An external recorder, a Macintosh computer, and a monitor. Easy. So we can record for 45 minutes, we can record 3 hours. Inherently, if we continue to develop it, we might be able to record direct to hard disk array and just record for 24 hours, 48 hours continuous. Now there's lots of upside on the development of this, but fundamentally at this point in time you've got 2 options. Go light with a laptop and the camera itself, or go more structured, more like a cinema shoot, where you've got camera and what I'll call a DIT station. So, Miles, can we put up, oh, you did, thank you. Good man. Operation of camera. On the left, it's pretty straightforward. Exposure time, illumination. The camera is a raw camera, like an array, like a red. We do not burn in color temperature at recording. We're capturing raw sensor data, and then your illumination value is simply a guideline. And the real thing here is to make sure the director doesn't freak out and go like, why are the colors like that? And it's like, yeah, well, don't worry about it. Yeah, but why are the colors like that? It's like, well, okay, let me show you where the colors should be then. Okay. So we're just choosing here 3200. But there's a range of presets that you would use if you're outdoors, obviously 5000, 6500, all that good stuff. Exposure. We're really operating as a fixed ISO camera, right? It's ISO 400. I think that's a good rating. Like anybody else, do your own tests, but ISO 400. We've got a range of exposure indicators. Can you go down to the bottom row there where it says clipping and just turn on, yeah, just turn on the bottom one and the top one? Oh, you did? Okay. You may have seen these on some other cameras too. I mean, basically what we do is we look at the raw data sensor from the raw data from the sensor. And we basically say if it's within the top 2% of values, indicate red, and if it's in the bottom 2% of values, indicate blue, and that's what's going on in here. And then there's zebras, and this is where you sort of set up typically for exposure to skin tone. Obviously, you would never shoot in this environment, but these are just basically exposure tools. So the main thing is you've got a fixed ISO, you've got an exposure, you've got tools, frame, bracket, the way you want. What's unique about this camera is, as it's VR, we're looking at all these 8 individual viewpoints. So especially if we're going on a script, right? We all know that the cost of a production is not the people behind the lens of the camera. It's the people in front of the lens. It's the actors, it's the sets. So if we're going to be efficient operationally, we have to do a very simple thing. It's like, if I said to you, let's rewind 20 years and you're back to shooting film, and the day that someone invented the video tap was probably a glorious day, because up until then we had to send the film to the lab and wait for it to come back the next day to see what happened. Okay, that's what we did. Then video taps came out, and we could actually see what's going on. And now if you went to anybody with a cinema camera and said, by the way, I'm going to take your viewfinder away, if that's all right with you, they'd go crazy. No, you're not going to do that. But actually VR is worse than that. Up until now, VR has been a scenario of, you shoot it, we'll take it to post, we'll stitch it, maybe a week later, we'll show you what you had. And it's like, okay, and that's partly my comment about we've got to get VR away from the experimentation phase into a proper professional phase. What you want to do is, I'm doing a script, so I need to know, on that take, was it a good take? Yes, no. Because if it wasn't, we're going to shoot it again. And if it was, we're going to move on. Because I don't know, I've got a budget that says 2-day shoot, not 3 days, not 2 days now and another day 2 weeks later, because that blows my budget, gets my customer really upset. So show me what's going on. So this is the first view that shows you what's going on. We're watching this in real time. There's a delay of 2 or 3 seconds, I think, from the camera live to what's going on here. But I can look at any one of these images, and I'll just pick one. If I want to inspect that more, okay, that's that particular view. I can square it up if I want to. And if you just pan around now and just keep going around. So it's actually letting me look right now. Actually, it's flipping around between all the cameras. I will say this to you. This preview, I like to think it was a video tap. This is not intended to be a judgment of color or final resolution. This is a judgment of timing and composition. And it's for the director to look into and basically say, do I have things where I want them to be? Did that action work out the way I need it to work out? So, particularly, as you blow it up bigger and bigger and bigger, it looks softer and softer and softer. That's fine. If you go to punch freeze though, okay, you see that snap, the resolution snaps back in there. Let's come out of freeze and let's go back to the 8-way view. You'll also see, and from now, just for kicks, go to HMD. Ha! Thank you. It's right there. Oh, it said it was not available. Is it not plugged in?
Because I'm plugged in, so they go.
Oh, I see. Oh, cool. Yeah, right. Okay. There's another view, the HMD view. So that's necessarily when you're showing something on a flat monitor, you're going to see it in 2D. This is a stereoscopic camera. So if I want to see it in stereo, then do this. Now I'm going to look around that very same scene. I'm going to see it exactly the way it is in 3D on set. So I can now check for stereoscopic and placement, and if I have sound, I put cans on, I can hear it the same way too. So this is what we call the director view, and it's absolutely unique for any VR camera that's on the market right now. And I would contend to you, when you're going down your checklist, which camera do I want to shoot on? I would go down a list something like, is it rugged and bulletproof and reliable? Check. Is it stereoscopic with surround sound? Check. Does it actually have a viewfinder that I can look at and verify composition and check on takes? Check. All these three things, like, these are absolutely mandatories, and OZO brings them to you. Thank you very much. But another thing, can you bring up preview? And bring up the preview and bring up me and the dog. There's another thing that happens often, is we don't shoot on our own. We shoot as part of a team, and often there's an executive producer sitting somewhere, and they may be on the other side of the country. And I had a comment from a customer in London the other day, and what he said was, blah, 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 and then we put this in a Dropbox and we sent it to the producer, and he was able to tell us that's not quite right, that's not what he meant. So we were able to go back and reshoot that scene. So what this is, we're all familiar with giving VR dailies to producers and to say, hey, this is what we did. This particular little clip, this is actually rendered out in this DIT station, and this is actually was put in a Dropbox and just sent across the country so anybody can download it. And there's a little lightweight player that runs on a Macintosh and lets me play this back. So let's just play that. And that's my little dog Bo, by the way. This is also about 2 o'clock in the afternoon down near Irvine. And tell me, it was bright. It was super bright. So this is just a little exercise of which Miles and I did this outside my house just to get a little sense of how we render out colors. This is not color corrected, this is not graded, literally this is straight from the camera, just like completely untouched. But one of the things you'll see is as we go around, Richard was saying that we don't stitch. So that's true. In this, we're not stitching here at all. Stitching is a function where you take the individual camera views and mathematically resolve them, either in a two-dimensional or a stereoscopic view. What we're actually doing here is we pan around, you'll see that there might be a little cross-dissolve somewhere. There. Because what it is that there's an overlap between these two cameras, and I'm just choosing which one of those two cameras to show you at this point in time. There you go. All right. So I'm just choosing basically to shift views from this camera to this camera. But this is the 2D view, right? If I took that same HMD headset and plugged it into that laptop, my executive producer on the other side of the country could be looking at it and going like, oh, okay, I get it. And you got to tell him, this is not color graded, this is not edited, this is raw camera footage. Is this what you were thinking of? Yes or no? And if you say yes, great, we'll continue. If you say no, okay, let's talk about what we need to do differently then. So yeah, this is another big plank in the you got to have sort of checklist. I got to show people what's going on as we're doing the shot, and the answer to that is yeah, we can do that. Actually, I've got a little request to the guys who are filming. Can we point the cameras away from the screen for a little bit and just point it at Miles? Because I want to show a clip that we're not really allowed to show anybody. Can we do that? Okay.
You're off the screen.
Sorry?
Off the screen.
You're off the screen. All right. Let's bring up another clip. We're all in the industry, right? So we see things that are not released to general public. This is a particular clip that's not released to general public, but here's a little example of something that was shot. And actually I'm doing exactly the same thing, but this was shot down somewhere south of here with a group that's fairly well known. And this is just a kind of example of we put the camera on the stage is rotating. There is sound that goes along with this as well, by the way. And again, this is part of the experience, right? So I'm there, and as an audience, I would never have permission to be in this location, and I'm free to look wherever I want. And for me, the ability to look wherever I want is actually part of the value and part of the emotional connection. So nobody gets permission to be there, and if you force me and edit, so I have to look in a specific direction. I know that it's cinematic, I know that it's a storytelling. If you let me be there and be part of this experience, that's, I think, where partly the emotional and the trust aspect really kicks in. So I think this, from a storytelling point of view, then the value is, how do I help the viewer and lead them to a viewpoint? And for me, audio is such a huge thing here, because frankly, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and you can be narrating what you're seeing, and even though you're telling me, like, this is going on, I can choose to look somewhere else. I can still listen to you, but I'm choosing to look somewhere else. And if you say something interesting, I'll turn back to you. And that's the difference for me between VR and not VR, is that in not VR, we're telling you what's going on, we're forcing you to look one direction. In VR, I get to look elsewhere. All right, thank you. Let's go back to me and my dog. Actually, let's go to creator. So thanks, we can go back on the screen now. I think also you saw there on the lighting, again, made the point about splits, mixed lighting, flash frames. Again, not processed whatsoever. Camera raw footage is what we were just looking at. So it's pretty impressive. The other piece of cameras, though, is workflow. Well, to a large extent, you could argue that workflow is things like batteries and media and monitoring on set, and that's all part of the workflow. But what a lot of people think of when we say workflow is post-production. So how does that work? To a large extent, VR is very similar to cinema in the sense that I've got raw footage, I've got to develop it into a file format that's consistent for the post-production industry. I've got a sound component to it. I've got graphics that I might need to add, and I've got to do a deliverable to whatever my distribution platform is. There's one extra thing in VR, this thing called stitching, which is not in any other device. And stitching is literally, I got those 8 images, I need to put them together into one image. But first of all, editorial. So we've got raw footage, I need to cut it down into something smaller. So the first thing I can do is literally I just take 2 camera views and I just render those out as an MP4. If I play that, and this is the footage from the camera that fell off the car, by the way, I'm just going to play that out. So I put that into a nonlinear editor, and what am I going to do with it? Fundamentally, I'm just choosing which clips are going to go put together, right? Because I'm not going to use all my raw footage. I'm going to choose which clips are appropriate. So I'll edit them together and come up with a edit decision list out of that process. But the other thing I can do with it at some point in time is I'm going to do a sound sweetening. And so what these little purple lines are actually overlaid are indications of where speakers are placed. If you were mixing it to a specific speaker configuration, this is a 4-speaker configuration. So if I've got external sound sources that I need to mix back to match up to the content, I need to know where that visually is in relation to my speaker configuration. So that's an indicator. So this also becomes the guide track to something like Pro Tools. Right? So this is the video guide track to Pro Tools. It's not meant to be stitched. This is just basically a sort of complete sweep around kind of view between 2 cameras. So this goes to my editorial and this goes to my sound sweetening. When I do get my editorial list back, I can then come out of this and I'll go back to my main creator. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set a timecode in, timecode out, and I'm going to start to export DPX files. So the DPXs are now going from the raw domain and they're generating RGB DPX files, which are just like, everybody uses those. So each of these views is going to come out as an individual 2K by 2K file, and I would take that into pretty much any color correction program that I'd want. Typically, you don't need to do any color balancing between the viewpoints. They're pretty consistent, but if you did, then you would basically put a power window around one of them and just say, right, do a global offset and do a trim of that particular camera, and then basically once it's done for that one frame, this is consistent for all the frames throughout the sequence. So let's just say that we do a color grade for artistic taste. The next process is stitching. And in stitching, there's a number of solutions out there. There are good 2D stitches, there are very few good 3D stitches out there, and stitching is definitely sort of an area of very, very rapid development. Our original philosophy was that we would not do stitching. We would not offer stitching, but rather we would offer our mathematics to people who are in the industry to put stitching into their applications. We had enough feedback from the industry that said, do that, do the math thing, but also please give us an option to put stitching into this desktop as well. So what we're really looking at in this stitching piece of it is there's a spectrum of choice. If you want to have a total turnkey arrangement with a post house, then we have an agreement with entities like Deluxe. So they can take your raw camera footage and they'll do everything for you for a price. If you want to be in the middle with using lots of different smaller post houses, some does editing, some does sound, yes, and we've been working with the Foundry, with Nuke, to get our math into there. So in their VR toolkit, then OZO stitching is already in there too. And then if you've got time but not money, then we have stitching tools in here as well. Can you just show stitching tools? And do we have anything that's been finished up stitched? So he'll pull that up. In stitching tools, the stitching philosophy here is extremely high quality, extremely low user input. Don't worry about time. Right, that's kind of where our stitching is in this particular iteration. So it's relatively slow, but the optical results that come out of it are fabulous. So, you know, I don't think at this stage we're really making 20-minute pieces in VR. We're more about 1 minute to 3 minutes. So if it takes an evening or overnight to do a stitch, it doesn't really matter that much. If you've got to do it fast, then there are things that we're doing with post houses to respect their kind of distributed GPU processing powers. And you know, in a big post house, time is money, so they do charge you for it. So we're working with people to, you know, give really the spectrum of options for this particular piece, because this is the time crunch element in VR that's unique here. The editorial and the sound sweetening is pretty consistent with what you're doing on any other project. So this is a little example of when we stitched it, right? This is an output. So actually what this has done is we've stitched it. We're not playing DPXs, we're playing MP4. Is this MP4s or this is DPXs? Okay, so this is the DPXs playing back. So we've stitched it. The last thing that you would do is the packaging. And as you go to Facebook or YouTube or whatever it is, they've each got their own delivery formats. And this is no different to, you know, you shot your program, you've got to give it to Discovery, or you've got to give it to DVD or Blu-ray. You know, everything's got its own little bit of metadata and timecode and resolution. So very similar thing. What we're aiming to do is to give you the master, if you will, the 4K digital master. We're giving you the digital master for VR, and then you may have to simplify it down for a specific distribution channel. Some of them are only 2D, some are 3D, some are stereo, some are complete surround sound. So, but that's a packaging thing that you do at the very end of the process. And for me, it's a very simple rule. Whoever's paying the money gets to define what the output format is. We're here to get paid. But if you shoot OZO, you've always got the security that what you created coming out of post is a digital master that can be repurposed. So if somebody comes back and says, aha, we've opened up this new stereoscopic full surround sound opportunity, we'd like you to go back and do that for me now. You've got the master data to do that. So just a last word on this. As we look out, we see that there are multiple levels of experience of VR, including domes, that's going to be part of it, but all the way down to cell phones and this 2D 360 stuff. Some people say, no, that's not VR. I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. What's important to me is that we monetize this thing so that we all have jobs, right? Semantics about that's VR, that's not, I don't care, that's for journalists and that's for pundits to say. What I look at is this. I'm going to take advertising as an industry, because whether you like them or whether you don't, the reality is if you're in television, you're funded by advertising, right? Movies is about one of the very few industries I can actually think of that really isn't funded by advertising. Even that's arguable, but television sure as hell is. Most things are, and so I'm just going to take that as a use case. So an advertiser, let's say it's a brand, doesn't matter who it is, pick one. Red Bull, right? They do lots of crazy things. They have an advertiser, they have a website, and they have videos on their website, great. And they're regular 16:9 2D ones, great. If they then said, hey, we have an experience which is a 2D 360, which is like you can take your cell phone and you can swipe it, and essentially it's a ring that goes around your head. If someone says, is that VR? Answer is, I don't care. Are they paying for it? Yes. Can I use OZO to shoot it? Yes. Is that the most efficient way to create that content? Yes. Okay, that's what I'm going to do then. But the nice thing is, if you got it, if someone came back and said, by the way, we now have a way to give you fully stereoscopic, fully immersive, and you can generate that from the same content, why wouldn't you offer that? Because you can also download that. So what we've been working at, and we'll be releasing it in about a few weeks' time, when we show content, we have our own player, because we haven't been happy with the quality of the players that have been out there. And to get this total immersion, I've said stereoscopic, sound, has to do all these things. Our player does those things. So we're going to be releasing that player as a software development kit by the end of June, rough time frame. And why that is important is this. That doesn't mean that YouTube and Facebook will immediately would do what we're doing. But what it does mean is that anytime that you're doing a project for any kind of entity, you could then say to them, oh, by the way, if you want to deliver that in this format, we have access to a player that we can download and we can rebrand it. We can rebrand it with your logo. So let's assume it was a medical procedure, just as an example. If you want to train doctors in surgical procedures and you were engaged to shoot that, and so this is spinal surgery and this is the way it works, and we're going to basically train doctors across the country, and they're going to get paid as a hospital $500 every time somebody goes through this thing, and it's a money-making venture. This kind of player would enable them to basically brand it with their medical hospital logo, download it from the website into a cell phone. The cost to the viewer is $100 for the frame, because the cell phone's free, and it's the cost of viewing the content. This is a huge thing for storytellers, right? This could be, I could be doing the same kind of thing with Cirque du Soleil. That was a great one. Everything goes on around me. How about an advert for Cirque du Soleil? Did you like that? How about come to the show? Because if you like this, the show's even better. How about training? How about, I don't know, go down that list of who wants to deliver an immersive experience, perhaps a place that you couldn't otherwise go, or an invitation to come. You may have not thought about this, but please come here. So advertising, storytelling, politics, religion, public safety, training, entertainment, yeah. All of those things. All of those things. That's why VR is going to be huge. Thanks very much.
One thing you didn't mention that I experienced at your first demo was that you had a band playing on the top of the Capitol Records building.
We did.
And we were able to see it at the Nokia Center downtown.
Yeah.
Live headsets right in the middle of the group. The ability to be able to put that streaming live is really something. That's another standout feature that really needs to be called attention to.
Can you go back to that little clip with flashing lights? Yeah.
And I also think that it's really fantastic that even though it's a lower resolution, that you can see it live, so you can see what's happening. How else can the director know what he's getting?
Exactly. So let me come back to those 2 points, because that's great. Thank you for reminding me of those 2 things. This is web browsed, right? This is actually a stereoscopic browse. This was actually done at the weekend. Local company, can't say who it was, just for confidentiality reasons, but this was streamed live from OZO over the internet. So this is immediately, right now, this is concert coverage, and it is 3D, but it would be stereo sound, but it's a 3D presentation hosted on a live. So it's a pay-per-view opportunity right there. There's also been some other things going on in sports, and again, there are things we can't say just yet because they're under confidentiality, but there's been a lot of experimentation in sports. I think streaming is going to be one of those things that really is a big opportunity. And one thing we did at NAB, which is fascinating, it's one thing to say that, let me put a viewer inside the ball and let them see it either later after we post-produced it or live through a streaming. But what we did at NAB was fascinating. We actually had a band, and we had 3 OZOs. We had one by the drummer, one by the piano player, and one on a jib. And we're cutting between them, actually mixing between them. And that was really interesting for me, because my assumption going in was, mentally, I'm not going to expect to jump from one location to... I've always wondered about how does cuts work in this medium, and then can you translate from position A to position B without going like, hang on a minute, because it's sort of breaking my theory here. And what was interesting was, no, it was fine. As long as you did it sequentially, as long as you went from there to there to there and back again, it was fine. If you went from there to there to there, and if you randomly jumped, it was a little different. But if you sort of walked in a sequence, it was almost like I just took a step to my right and then re-engaged the picture again. What was really interesting was dissolves between cameras also worked. So I could be, and the director in this case was choosing for us, right? So we go from close up to the piano player, so you can be seeing that. And then you go to the flying jib, so the camera was being moved around. And you could look around behind you and you could see the guy operating the jib. And then you sort of come down, sort of close to this guy, and then they would cross dissolve to that camera. And it all worked great. And it said to me that, hang on a minute, even broadcasting, even this classic multi-camera broadcasting, you can do it in this format. So as much as I'm very wedded to this philosophy of inside out, and let me talk to the camera as a friend, like any medium, frankly, we're just finding out right now what is the best way of telling stories. I like that one because I understand it, but there are going to be a lot of different ways to exploit this technology, and they're doing some really fascinating stuff.
Does that do it?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's hear it for Stuart. Great